It is Friday, May 15th. Let's talk PlayStation. Welcome back, everyone, to another Directive 8020 episode of LTPS. As per usual, let's begin with our PS Plus reminder. The May monthly games are still live on PSN. Make sure you claim those. And also PS Plus Extra and Premium's May lineup has been revealed, going live this coming Tuesday on the 19th. And for PS Plus Extra, we have a handful of standout titles, that being Star Wars Outlaws, Red Dead Redemption 2. Those bigger games are typically in the service for about 6 months, so just bear that in mind with those games. And then also you have Flintlock, The Siege of Dawn, and then Broken Sword, Shadow of the Templars Reforged, and Natria, The Last Song. I think that was in there before, but now it's back in. And then PS Plus Premium, we have one lone PS1 game, that is Time Crisis, with gyro aiming supported as well, so that's also something to remember, is that game, because of the novelty of the light gun support, which PS5 and 4 cannot do, it does support gyro aiming on the DualShock 4 and the DualSense, which is cool. Just also disappointing is that the game is published by Bandai Namco, and we know it's based on publishers for trophy support, so do not expect any trophies for that game, which sucks because I actually think it would be really cool to play Time Crisis again on PS5 with gyro aiming to still sort of have the spirit of that game and how you should be playing it. Having said that, though, not too bad of a lineup for May. At least you've got something very big with Red Dead, and then something more on the mediocre side, but worth checking out via subscription with Star Wars Outlaws. Anyway, moving on to our first news story, we have a new Welcome Hub widget Sony is testing right now on PlayStation 5, currently in beta, and this one has two views, which is Trending Now, or Top 10 Most Played Games based on players for that week in your country. So Trending Now shows what games and modes saw a big surge in gameplay hours, and then Top 10 shows the most popular games based on players that week, and it does show a player count number, which I really like, because this is one of those things where if they obfuscate the numbers, it's not really that interesting to look at, but I do like that you can see that, yeah, Fortnite, Call of Duty, Rainbow Six Siege, your usual suspects, they do show millions of players, an exact number, which is pretty neat. Now, I will say the top 10, I'm not sure how useful that is really going to be to keep on, because unless it's different for your country, I'm sure EA Sports FC would be higher based on where you are, but it's probably going to be the same games every week. The other option for Trending Now is much more interesting because it's based on huge jumps in popularity based on a percentage. So some games will always be showing up differently based on major content drops. It's probably still going to skew very heavy towards multiplayer unless there's a big single player game coming out. But it's cool to see random games show up and it jumps by 200 something percent every week or so. So really neat. And I love that this widget is addressing one of the main concerns for PS5 at launch, if you remember a while ago, which is the console social experience feels very isolated, right? It felt very cold and stoic coming off the PS4's What's New section, so the Welcome Hub has been a great landing page on the console. I just really hope that with all these new backgrounds and widgets, that this thing is still going to be available on PS6 for the UI experience there. It sucks that we got it so late into the PS5 cycle, and we're actually not too far away from next gen, so I want it to stay around because it really is a great way to start up the console, and that's the first thing you see. Let's get into some PlayStation Studio news, beginning with Saros and the estimated sales for the game so far, which this report comes from, again, Alinea Analytics. They've been getting more and more attention, so at this point in time, I know there is a lot of contention surrounding their numbers, how they get to those numbers, how it's very much a third party and they're estimating, but they're making so much big headlines for every big story that they do, so let's first acknowledge what they're claiming and then talk about it after. So with that said, they are estimating that in the first 2 weeks of the game being on sale, they've sold 300,000 copies, generating $22 million, and about a third of those copies were from the Early Access Digital Deluxe Edition. Now, based on a launch-aligned basis, Alinea estimates the game has sold a bit slower than Returnal, which, officially speaking, Returnal hit 560,000 units sold in just over 2 months back when it came out April 2021 on an install base of 8 million PS5 consoles. So the discussion going on here is that Saros is selling slower than Returnal on a much larger install base for PlayStation 5. Now, with the sales estimates, here's the thing, right? I actually can fully see that number being realistic, put it in that 10-something% margin of error. let's be realistic. The game is very likely not well under or well over that ballpark. We saw some initial sales charts. I mean, we should be able to safely humor the idea that the game is not doing incredibly fantastic or, doing that poorly, right? It is charting. It's doing somewhat well. It's just more an argument of what does that really mean for the game when we heard last year that the budget was around 75 something million dollars, and how is it doing so poorly compared to Returnal on a smaller install base back in 2021. Now, it's a very known thing, which is that early adopters, that early cycle of consoles that are being shipped out there, there's a very sticky attach ratio for the bigger high-profile games, for the PlayStation Studio titles. So the numbers being soft on a much bigger install base is not even remotely surprising to me. In fact, a lot of sequels do tend to do not nearly as well, which sequels are pretty much always coming out further into the life cycle of a console with a larger install base. It does not guarantee the game is going to capture a larger audience. Now, obviously, I was also hoping this game was going to be able to capture that bigger audience. I'm not sure what was really realistic. And also, it's only been 2 weeks. The game could have some sales legs. It does have to sit on the market for a little bit over time, and I'm sure it will be able to make its money back and hopefully be okay for Housemarque. It does make me nervous, no doubt. I mean, the thing I love about Housemarque is not just the gameplay and how they've evolved from the twin-stick shooters, but it's also that Housemarque got that level of support from PlayStation to evolve into that and do a genre that doesn't really get that level of investment. So there's been a lot of conversation surrounding if Saros is better than Returnal or not, if it should still cost $70. And I still stand by the scenario of I really appreciate that they got to do games like Returnal and Saros, and I never want to say it should cost that much money, because I'll always advocate for games being as cheap as they reasonably can be, but there has to be a balancing act of they make money and people get a great experience. I'm 50-something hours into Saros, and I just can't in good faith say the game should be 50 based on the genre. It's tough to say. It's a really weird balancing act. It has to be a beneficial situation for both parties here. And so I'm obviously biased. I love the game a lot. I love the studio a lot. So it's tough for me to say that I want the game to be cheaper, but I want it to do well, right? So it sucks to see it allegedly being a bit slow and a bit soft on sales, but I can't say I'm even remotely surprised by that. It's just where we're at, and I hope that Housemarque has a reliable future to keep doing games like this. Next up for Intergalactic, the Heretic Prophet, we have two things going on here. The first one is a cool Easter egg pointed out by none other than Tati Gabrielle during a recent interview, where they mentioned that the name of the character that they're playing, Jordan A. Munn, that is a reference to Naughty Dog's original studio name, Jam Software. So cool little thing there. I'm sure somebody probably spotted that, but it was neat to see. And then we also have some new details shared on a Naughty Dog employee's LinkedIn about what they're building for this game. So it says, quote, designed new dynamic conversation system for implementing story and ambient dialogue on Intergalactic, the Heretic Prophet. Collaborated with narrative to prototype constructed language and dialogue events, and created test levels by generating block mesh and scripting NPCs to test new systems in controlled environments. Now, the big standout one there, obviously, is new dynamic conversation systems. Ever since Uncharted and The Last of Us, outside of optional conversations in The Last of Us, it's very linear scripted storytelling. I'd imagine they're not going to go too crazy here, but this does, at the very minimum, telegraph that they are venturing into more player agency with their experiences. And so with Intergalactic, that's been the running idea in theory with the sci-fi and the planet, and once Jordan gets there, is that perhaps it will be something a little bit more FromSoft-esque, as in you're just sort of let off a leash, and whatever you do and run into is how the story plays out based on certain progression, and now possibly talking with people, you have more agency in how those conversations go. Still remains to be seen as far as what that actually will amount to, but hopefully we'll see more of the game later this year, because this is definitely climbing up my list of things that is I'm very excited for, because it is a new IP and it's very ambitious from Naughty Dog. In other Naughty Dog news, we have Uncharted 4's 10th anniversary, which recently came and went, and so Naughty Dog and SIE has been celebrating by offering free PSN avatars. Here's the codes to download for your applicable region, so that's pretty cool. There's also a PS5 Welcome Hub background coming as well, so that's fine. The bigger news this week for that game on its 10th anniversary was that over on YouTube, TheKempy released a very comprehensive hour-and-a-half long video going over Amy Hennig's version of Uncharted 4. And this is very thorough because they've been modding the game for years now, and so over time they've spotted various references and assets in the game files to Amy's version of the game. And so from that, and then also scouring artist portfolios online, finding unused motion capture sessions, they've compiled the most comprehensive overview of Amy's version of this story so far. They piece it all together, how it deviates. They don't do direct comparisons, but they spend that hour-and-a-half long video explaining here's what the story probably was going to be, which for years the baseline we always knew was that Cutter was in the game and that Sam was going to be the antagonist collaborating with Rafe. And so it's such a good video. I can't summarize the whole thing, it's way too long, but I will encourage you all to check it out. I'll put a link down below in the description for anybody that wants to go see it, but it's so good. I will say the disappointing thing always was that Cutter is not in Uncharted 4, the final version of the game, or Lost Legacy. Such a good character. I think that was maybe the one tragedy for sure out of the entire thing. But you can see her version. It does play out much differently. I still love the final game that we did get, and so I'm not sure if it's safe to say it was a net positive, all things considered, but it was still a really fascinating thing to see, and so huge shout out to TheKempy. Next up, Helldivers 2 has been going through it with massive pushback from the community based on recent changes going on with the game. So right now the game on Steam has mostly negative reviews as people are clamoring for updates and better game balancing because there's concern about how enemies are receiving too many buffs. The recent Warbond effectively paywalls the new vehicle stratagem. The recent Reddit AMA with Johan Pielstead did not go over well at all and really failed to address those player concerns. So there's just a lot going on. Now, obviously, I'm not playing the game actively. I can't speak to it. It does seem like it's that typical like cyclical cycle that a lot of these live service games go through, and that it's really hard to parse through what is really a problem and an issue and how much of it falls on maybe a more vocal minority. Now, obviously there was enough reviews to influence the Steam reception, of course, but that might not be very reflective of what are a few hundred to maybe a few thousand players that are angry about something, and that's not really a small amount of players. But if you consider how many daily active players there are, which are in the tens of thousands, that might not be as reflective of how bad they are, like how poor the direction of the game is going, right? So I can't speak to what's actually happening, but it's always a matter of figuring out exactly where the balancing act is there of Arrowhead making sure that they have an experience that doesn't go too crazy with power creep and they're not overly aggressive with monetization, and the players are satisfied with the content that they're getting. So hopefully Arrowhead can figure that out over time, because it seems like there's been already a few of these cycles so far, as I'm alluding to, so they've just they're back in it again. Moving on to Bungie and Marathon, where we have a big blog post from the game director, Joe Ziegler, going over Season 2 and some things they're experimenting with and looking at changing for the game based on player feedback. It's a very lengthy post, but for those that are curious about maybe elements of Marathon that you're not super into or you want some PvE content, it seems like they are exploring that. So they do say they want to build more survival experiences for different moods, like if you want the full sweat action or more laid back and chill gameplay. So they do say they're exploring more PvP, PvE, and PvP light experiences, and they're continuing to experiment with experimental queues to learn more around these experiences. So they're making a very calculated effort of, look, we hear you, we know there's some demand for these elements, we're going to start looking into that. I like that they're saying it, because very likely the game was built not with those things entirely in mind. So I think that's sort of their way to telegraph this idea of, we're working on it, but it's going to take us some time to really implement that into the game, right? Because I think with PvE, for example, if you do experiences like that, you want to tailor it around that. I mean, that I've seen people say that, oh, well, that just gets back into the whole Destiny sort of moment-to-moment gameplay, or making Destiny at that point. But, you know, you can do that in the marathon vibe and footprint of what is foundational for the way that game looks and feels and plays. So, I don't know. I mean, I think that is the right thing to do if they want to try and capture some more players and have some better onboarding, which is just having something else to do where you're not constantly getting beat down by what is a very hardcore experience at the end of the day. Moving on to Marvel Tokon, we had this really weird thing going on where initially there was this report that for the story mode in that game, there would be no battling whatsoever. It would have a 10-hour campaign told in a comic book style, panel-by-panel storytelling, which would make sense for Marvel characters and the Marvel property, but just no battles, which does sound very weird, but since then, this has been corrected by a quote from the producer Takashi Yamanaka confirming to 4gamer.net that yes, episode mode will have playable battles throughout the journey, so you can enjoy the comic book style storytelling with some fighting along the way. So that at least saves the campaign for the game, but it's interesting because reading into this initially, I had seen people say that, oh no, that's actually pretty normal for Arc System Work games. They have minimal battles or almost none in their stories. I don't know, I don't play those games, but I was like, huh, that seems really weird. So to have 10 hours of story content to tell, and you're not integrating any battles in there, it just seemed very strange. But no, there will be, so that's good, especially for players that like Marvel characters and just want to have some fun with a story mode for 10-ish hours, which seems like actually a decent length of time for a fighting game. So if you're not super into the 4v4 in the PvP environment, you could probably have your fun PvE and just go through the story mode that way. Okay, let's move on to a very big PlayStation interview that came out this past week, where we have Christopher Dring of the game business speaking with Christian Svensson, who is SIE's VP of second and third party content ventures and strategic initiatives, which is a long way of saying they manage non-first party games on PlayStation. And we learned a lot about how they handle their job and how SIE manages content on their platform, how they scout studios, how they work through all these partners, the programs, the funding, their methodology. It was really insightful. So here's the pertinent items you need to know about what PlayStation does with this content. So Christian works with 5 teams globally, and he explains that one of those teams is very proactive, as in they reach out to studios if there's games out there that are maybe, let's say, blowing up on Twitch or Steam Early Access, and they want to see what they can do to make sure that game is coming to PlayStation. They're also very reactive. So maybe, for an example, a bunch of developers leave a big studio, they spin up a smaller studio, and Sony wants to reach out, make sure they've got good onboarding, and make sure they have dev kits, which Christian says they're approaching 10,000 partners registered with PlayStation right now, which that really illustrates how insurmountable in a way it is to manage the content flow on the PlayStation Store. Now, they don't talk about this in this conversation, but it did immediately make me think of how it is a problem that the PS Store nowadays is getting heavily flooded with AI slop, misleading art for the game pages and screenshots and shovelware asset flip games. And we spend a lot of time talking about this because we know that something should be done about this content, but now we have a better idea of how many teams are out there, the footprint of how they're trying to manage that much content that flows into the store, and you do need some manual labor, human process, and reviews to look at this content. And so it does give us a much better idea of just what they're working with, and just there's so many dev kits and partners out there, and they spend time talking about this too, which is that it is very easy to sign up on PlayStation.com, and within a few business days, they can start getting a test kit and dev kit out there to you, and that's good, but we've now seen where we are today, and so again, they don't talk about this, but that really stuck out to me of like, oh, that's how it's been so problematic as of late, which is you've got some kits out there that maybe shouldn't be out there at this point. Now, speaking on PlayStation's reach and their role in the games business, which really has come down to more of a responsibility at this point to the wider gaming space, we do have this quote here where Christian says, and I quote, "If you look at PlayStation's history, from the beginning we've been a very third-party focused ecosystem. If you talk to Nishino-san, who has a very product-led background, he'll say PlayStation is just a plastic box without content, and third parties are the lion's share of the content. So it is critical that we continue to lean in and drive and be ambitious and bring new voices to the platform. If we ever stop doing that, the industry will stop growing. We have, as an industry leader, a responsibility to continue to drive and push and grow the whole industry, not just our own business. From here, Christian talks about how they have some programs that they offer, what they do for smaller indie devs, grants, things like that, and that segues nicely into a bigger portion of the conversation, which is that they reveal just how much funding they do, even on a generational basis. So for this generation alone, they've either funded fully or partially over 120 games, and that's not counting hero projects. So again, they have an indie fund, and then they have different grants they give out throughout the year, and of course the hero projects themselves. Now he does say for the grants and the funding, that does represent 1% of the total volume of games coming out, but they do still have those limited funds where it's applicable. And for the China Hero project, they say they're preparing for a fourth wave and bringing in outside investment to scale what they're doing. And they're doing the same thing for the Middle East North Africa project as well. So they really are scaling up. But this is the thing, right? I think when you hear 120 games that they've either fully funded or partially in this generation, which seemingly has this identity crisis that we talk about of that there's hardly any games coming out or nothing feels next gen. And, we're not going to go down that rabbit hole again, obviously, but I think you hear that noise in the enthusiast space about the games that are coming out. And then you hear 120 funded by SIE. And, there's maybe a miscalculation, like 120, that sounds like a ton. They don't disclose everything, and not every one of those games turns into some sort of very obvious exclusivity or timed exclusive agreement or marketing rights. I mean, sometimes they do, in some way, shape, or form, hand out money, and that leads to games shipping on the platform, which holistically, for the PS5 cycle, this is a point I've mentioned too. When PlayStation was funding anything, almost always that was them saying, we'll give you money, but we have to own the IP. That's how PlayStation over 15, 20-ish something years initially built this treasure trove of IP. That's how they own so much. They don't really do that nowadays, and I think it's much better and healthier for the business that when they are funding projects, however little they might hand out, they still let the developer keep the IP, or the publisher, depends obviously, but 120 is a lot just for this cycle. Now, touching on the content strategy for PlayStation Plus, they do say very openly what we've always seen in that they don't do a lot of day one titles. They primarily focus on indie games, 4 to 6-ish a year, and that's what they're planning to continue to do, I would imagine. So they don't say a lot there, but Christian does make it pretty clear that that has been the PS Plus content strategy. It does work for the most part. I mean, certain games get way more attention, like your Stray or Chia, and it's really cool when that stuff happens. But yeah, I think it's pretty clear from this point on, we're still not expecting major day one launches from larger budget titles from, of course, their own studios, but even external partners as well. Now, another interesting topic is Christian talked about how the company deals with release dates for their own games and if they share that stuff as a courtesy to partners with their release dates as well. So for an example, something like Marvel's Wolverine, if a game is going to be releasing in September, do they provide a heads up to their partners about avoiding that release week? So Christian said, and I quote here, "Air traffic control we have to be very careful with. Games move all the time. You could tell a partner, hey, you might not want to be in the first half of September, so they set their game in October, but then that big first-party game moves to that October date. You have to be very careful with that kind of telegraphing. It can come back to bite you." Yeah, I would imagine that's the norm, although I think it's certainly conditional on the kind of game and external partner that they're working with. So I'm sure he's not at liberty to say this, but I'm fairly certain with certain partners in larger games, they might exchange that information, not the exact date, but they might do that through lawyers or something. I'm fairly certain that when it comes to higher profile releases and higher profile information that is being discussed, it will be between very few people involved, and it will go through lawyers. Now, as for the future of games, the roadmap, the content pipeline, Christian seems very bullish on what is to come for the future. So he says, quote, "I'm in an incredibly privileged position to have amazing visibility into what games will be for the next 3, 4, 5 years. I literally cannot explain to you. Last year was an amazing year for games. This year will be even better. Next year will be better still. The trajectory of content is unbelievably positive, and we as an industry should be super optimistic about where we're going in spite of the headwinds." This is one of those topics where I think they were always going to be very positive because they kind of have to be in the context of Chris being granted such a high-profile interview. You know, somebody like Christian Svensson is not going to be talking a lot with the media, so they're going to be quite bullish on the future and the outlook of software coming out. But the thing is, we can look behind us and we can see it has been a lot of really strong stuff. And so I would think that he's probably right. We've got some great games on the horizon. Let's move on to some third-party news, beginning with Grand Theft Auto 6 and the pre-orders, or lack of pre-orders, but maybe that's about to change. So initially there's been a lot of speculation on maybe it's soon, the 13th, maybe that's related to the PlayStation marketing deal and the PS Store deals page being down until the 13th. That came and went, nothing. Maybe the Game Informer cover issue, that didn't happen. And then the expectation of maybe a new trailer ahead of Take-Two's financials, like the last trailer. Well, either way, the big new item here, which is official, it's real, confirmed, which is that the Best Buy affiliate account has sent out emails claiming the GTA 6 pre-order begins May 18th. It's a real legitimate email that has been sent out, so maybe it is finally happening soon. I am not confused, but maybe a bit surprised because they were pretty adamant about saying that the marketing campaign would begin in the summer. We're still technically in spring, and so why would you announce pre-orders and not align that with the marketing cycle? Because that's kind of what you do, right? Is that, okay, pre-orders are out, and then we're a few months away from the game launching. I mean, November's still very far away. I don't know. I mean, the thing is, they can market this game however they want. They can do pre-orders whenever they want. We all know it's going to do fine. I think people are just very anxious of seeing the price tag because that's what is really the big curiosity. Not necessarily locking in a copy of the game. It's not going to be hard to buy the game. It's more a matter of what is the price. Maybe we'll find out soon. Moving on to Shift Up and Stellar Blade, because they've confirmed that they will release new details for the game. Not very soon, but at least sometime this year, later this year. They've confirmed that development is going well, progressing smoothly, and so the sequel, we will find out more about that game sometime this year, alongside Project Spirits as well. Now, this is a good time to remind folks that they've scaled up. They're now a public company. They're bringing in other studios. And so at this point in time, Shift Up has turned into something bigger than any sort of publishing agreements that they need from SIE. So they're going to self-publish the Stellar Blade sequel and probably anything else that they do. So ever since going public, I mean, I think that was pretty obvious. So it won't be a PS Studios game, but there is still a sequel, and it will be cool to see how that pans out. Now, this is more of a small thing, but still totally expected, which is eventually this being more and more real of Halo Campaign Evolved coming out on PlayStation 5. So over on the Halo subreddit, one user put up this picture of how their local GameStop now has a retail shelf display of Halo with the PS5 banner up top, and just saying that it's still insane to them to now see this in the flesh. And I think that's going to continue as we get more and more Halo Campaign Evolved information, and yes, a physical launch which will have that PS5 banner. Like, physically holding it will be such a novel thing, but it will be insane. And I'll tell you, like, I saw this picture and I'm like, yeah, it does. It looks not real in a way, you know, because it very much is a Sega moment of Sonic being on other platforms. It just, in a way, it doesn't look right, but that's also what was so crazy about that confirmation, is that at least for this game, we do know it is coming to PlayStation 5. Next up, let's talk about the Dead Space franchise, because over on the FRVR podcast, we have the former writer and producer on the franchise, Chuck Beaver, talking about how the numbers just aren't there anymore for this franchise to be financially viable. Even going on to say that the series stopping after Dead Space 3 did not feel unfair. They had a decent run, but from a producer point of view and understanding sales, he gets why another game was not greenlit after the remake from Motive. another explanation they gave was that horror games have a bit of a ceiling on them. Ideally, they need to be hitting 7 million sales plus to really make it work. So basically in Resident Evil territory, which I guess for Dead Space and the way the game looks, the scope of it, because the game is quite long comparative to RE games, which are very short and meant to offer a lot of replayability. Because it's funny, with game budgets, for an example, right? Another story that we had this past week is that Silent Hill 2 and Silent Hill F are seen as very good, strong commercial successes for Konami, because they recently confirmed that Silent Hill F had crossed over 2 million sales, and then Silent Hill 2, which is on PS Plus Extra right now, crossed over 6 million players. And that's great for them. And Silent Hill, those two games alone account for like a large portion of the entire Silent Hill franchise because they're modern games that captured a bigger audience. But those numbers are not even close to 7 million full-blown sales. But Dead Space is, a campaign of 8 to 12-ish hours. I think Dead Space 2 and 3 are even a bit longer. And they visually are quite realistic looking for their time and the remake from Motive. So, the numbers just don't really work for that budget and also where the teams are located. Because remember, it's the labor cost, which is also a big factor into how much it takes to make these games. So it's a shame, though. Dead Space is one of those horror games that I really connected with. It scared the living hell out of me back when I played the original and then the follow-ups, but they're right. Unless you're Resident Evil, there really is a ceiling on how well a horror game can really do. Moving on to a rumor for Rayman Legends getting a remake. So this was talked about on the Insider Gaming podcast from Tom Henderson, where they just briefly mentioned that he thinks we'll hear more about this game this summer. So allegedly we know that there's multiple Rayman projects in the works. And with Legends, that's a game that came out in 2013 for PS3 and Vita, then PS4 in 2014, so there is a playable version on hardware today. But apparently that game's getting a remake, which I'm not sure if remake is the right word there, because what did they have to do to that game? Based on the presentation and the artistic design of it, I mean, it's a fully fine playable game on today's hardware. Unless we're talking not remake, which is more of a native PS5 version, shadow drops, you just get, 4K, 120 or something, because that's probably what the game is easily going to achieve on PS5 hardware. I don't know, this one was a bit weird because everyone saw this and they're like, what? Legends? I mean, it's a great game, but like a native PS5 version, unless they are truly remaking it with new assets, I'm not sure that's really necessary outside of just a frame rate and resolution bump, which would make the game look very beautiful. Next up, the Lies of P sequel and a controversial job posting. So we know this game has a sequel on the way, but developer NeoWiz has put up a recent job posting which has caught a lot of flack because they are straight up seeking an AI creator or AI artist. That's how they're describing it. And the job responsibilities mention the use of AI-based texturing and modeling assistance, making character concept drafts using Stable Diffusion and Midjourney, integrating AI tools into existing art workflows to reduce production time, building an efficient AI art pipeline, training unique AI models, identifying the latest Gen AI trends, and also making sure that this person has a good understanding of AI ethics. It's just a full-blown AI artist job position, which is insane, but also that's 100% where it's going, and some developers are not going to hide this whatsoever. They're going to make it very clear as to what they want to achieve, how they're going to achieve it, and that's a role, which it's nuts. I've also been hearing a lot about the friction that is happening with certain Eastern studios where it's like culturally it's much more widely accepted to be using AI and Gen AI for even things like art assets, whereas by the time they want to ship their games here in the West, there's pushback. So there is that friction at play. But there's still ethical issues, right? Ethical and moral issues for certain aspects of the creative portion of the business. I'm all for using it in a very responsible way where it's efficient and it does fit in properly to the production pipeline for a game, but it does creep into the territory of art, and that is where it's a problem for me and many others. Next up, we have a rare sighting and interview for Ken Levine, the game director on BioShock, BioShock Infinite, now working on Judas. He was speaking with IGN's Brian Altano, going over their methodology for game design, the BioShock franchise, and Judas. It was a really good talk, but what we're going to zero in on is Judas and why the game is taking so long. So Ken was explaining how BioShock and BioShock Infinite are very linear games, but Judas is more reactive. So he said, quote, "So first, we're just doing the raw technology, something we build on top of Unreal Engine. And then there was, okay, how do we write for this? How do we build encounters for this? And we kissed many, many, many frogs along the way. And time just was passing. I get that it's a long time, and it seems like a hugely long time. I'm not sure how we would have kissed those frogs any faster." Yeah, I'm going to take a wild shot in the dark and say, outside of other things that we've heard throughout the years of, Ken might be hard to work for and a lot of things get built and scrapped, but it might be a lot of that at play, being a little bit picky about the core technology and building a good foundation, because you have to sort of settle on that and then you go into full production and build out from there. So if they spent, let's say, 3-4 something years just on that core foundation and systems alone of these branching narrative paths that influence their villainy system is what they're calling it. If it takes them a long time to figure that out, then there's all these additional years that have to take place for full production. I mean, full production technically should only be 2-3-ish something years, but you can see how it snowballs into a 8 to 10 year something dev cycle, which is nuts. And you might add additional years if the leadership is problematic, which we've heard of, obviously. And it's hard to say exactly what went down, but I'm sure we might get stories at some point. But either way, this is a game I'm still deeply excited for. I cannot wait to see what they've spent so much time figuring out, and I hope we will get a release date sometime soon. Moving on to PlayStation Productions with some set photos for The Last of Us Season 3, where filming is going on in Vancouver, Canada right now. And so we have some spy shots of Kiriana Crater as Lev and then Caitlin Deaver as Abby. So they are full steam ahead on Season 3, which is going to be primarily the Abby story. But we can also probably expect that I'm thinking Season 3 will be the last one. So they're going to also wrap up the theater sequence and then the barn and then what happens in Santa Barbara. Or at least I'm just assuming, because it seems like viewership has definitely been pretty, not low. I mean, overall viewership was high, but the sort of satisfaction and sentiment surrounding it has not really been all that positive, which is a shame. I do find Season 2, it's still, to me, having sat on it for as long as I have, it's like a 7 out of 10. Like, I've got problems with it. I think what should have been an easy slam dunk, 9 out of 10, 10 out of 10, for such an emotionally engaging story, there's a lot of missteps that just were a little bit too down for me. But I'm still excited to see the third season. I still want to see it play out in live action. So I think, reception or just the buzz surrounding it is not nearly as exciting as it was with Season 2. I think by the time it's here, people will come back around to it and get ready to see how it plays out. But we did have those photos, and so far at least they both look good on set. Now, with all that said, it is time for Let's Talk Plus, the weekly Let's Talk PlayStation giveaway, where one of you can win a $10 PSN code. I would like to congratulate this viewer right here. I'll be contacting you very soon via email or X, and if you'd like to win a $10 PSN code, it is so simple. You can follow the link down below or scan the QR code and enter the Gleam giveaway, and supporting this channel a number of ways can gain you an entry, and I'll announce the winner next week, because I'm trying to help pay for your games. Those are some of the stories from this past week that I wanted to talk about with you all, and our Tuesday conversation was the PS5's reputation. Has it been tarnished? Its legacy? How will we reflect on PS5 with the price increases and the live service games? So that's the thought piece on Tuesday. We had Click R3 this past Sunday, so not on Thursday like we normally do. My birthday was on Thursday, actually, so I'm getting older, folks, but that's why that happened there. And then coming up, another upload on Tuesday as per usual. Click R3 will be the following week. And that is pretty much it. So that concludes this week's episode of Let's Talk PlayStation. I'm Ryan Panecki. Thank you all so much for talking with me, and I will see you all next Friday.